Hunting is supposed to feel controlled. You check the wind, study the terrain, mark your access point, and move into the dark with a plan that has already made sense in your head. That is what makes certain hunting stories so disturbing. Not because they begin with obvious danger, but because they begin with ordinary conditions. A cold morning, a familiar stand, a known trail, a call meant to locate game, a stretch of timber that has always felt manageable, and then shift, without warning, into something the mind cannot explain fast enough. A tree stand shows signs of use that should not be there. A heavy shape circles the trunk and does not leave. A call comes back from the timber sounding almost right, but not right enough. And the worst part is how the brain tries to fix it in real time. It tells you another hunter got there first. The smell is drifting in from farther off. The movement below you is just passing through. The tracks are old. The radio is breaking up. The answer in the trees only sounds strange because the terrain is playing with distance, because the truth is harder to accept, that some places in the woods stop feeling shared and start feeling occupied. That height does not always mean safety, and that once something begins answering back from the dark, it may not be answering for the reason you think. Tonight's stories follow 3 hunters who enter the woods expecting a normal morning. Dan Earnhardt, returning to a secluded stand site in Allegheny National Forest, Pennsylvania, where subtle changes around his tree begin to suggest that someone else has been using the exact same opening and may have been there longer than he has. Corey Embry, bow hunting alone in the Tensas River Basin of northeastern Louisiana, where something heavy begins circling the base of his tree before daylight, and keeps coming back until he realizes it is not trying to pass by at all. And Declan Wells, hunting elk in the Black Hills National Forest of South Dakota, where locator calls, radio check-ins, and movement in the timber begin to form a pattern that feels less like tracking game and more like being drawn somewhere on purpose. The most disturbing hunting horror stories are not always about what steps into view. Sometimes they are about what stays just outside it. Sometimes they are about how quickly the woods can stop feeling empty. And sometimes they begin with a routine that feels completely familiar, right up until something in the dark starts responding like it already knows you are there. Tonight, these are 3 hunting horror stories, and all 3 begin before sunrise. Story 1. The Stand Above Mine. I have hunted the same section of Allegheny National Forest long enough to know when something is off before I can explain why. That part of Pennsylvania gets into you if you let it. The woods up there are not dramatic in the way people picture mountain country. They are older than that. Wet, steep in places, flattened in others. All of it stitched together with hemlock shade, hardwood ridges, laurel thickets, and logging traces that look like roads on an old map until you are actually standing on them in the dark with a headlamp and realize they are nothing but 2 muddy tire depressions full of leaves. It is beautiful in daylight. Before sunrise, it feels like a place that has learned how to keep things. My name is Dan Earnhardt. I am 38 now, married, 2 kids, live outside Erie, and work maintenance for a regional hospital system. Most of my years fluorescent lights, boiler rooms, service tunnels, and fixing things people only notice when they stop working. Hunting is the one thing that still feels like mine. No phone calls, no alarms. No one asking where the extra filters are or why the hot water loop is running cold on the 3rd floor. Just dark woods, cold breath, and enough silence to hear yourself think until you start wishing you could not. I had been hunting that particular stand site for 3 seasons before the year this happened. It was not a permanent stand. I do not leave expensive gear on public land if I can help it, and I know what kind of people wander public woods once the season opens. But the tree was good, the access was better, and the clearing out in front of it funneled movement across a narrow shelf between a laurel-choked drop and a ridge of white oak. Deer used that shelf like it had been poured in concrete for them. The trick was getting in without blowing scent all through it. I had figured out a long back approach from an old logging road that petered out near a wash. From there, I followed a deer trail that dipped through ferns and crossed a shallow drainage before rising into a stand of tall, straight timber. It took me 40 extra minutes, but that was why the place worked. Most hunters are not willing to earn a spot in the dark if there is an easier one closer to the truck. The first season I found it, I saw 3 does and a buck just after first light. The second year, I missed a broadside 8-point because I rushed the shot with numb fingers. The third year, I tagged the biggest deer of my life there, a thick-necked 10-point that came in ghost quiet with frost on his back like powdered glass. That sight had history with me. It had a shape in my head. Every root, every snag, every leaning trunk and split limb around it sat where I expected. That is why the smallest changes started bothering me right away. The first morning of rifle season that year was colder than forecast. My truck said 22 when I parked at the gated trailhead. The sky was hard and clear, and every sound carried. I shouldered my pack, checked the sling on my rifle, clicked off my dome light, and started walking under a moon bright enough to silver the tops of the trees. I remember thinking the woods smelled clean. Frozen leaves, damp earth locked under the surface, that mineral smell the cold pulls up from the ground. Halfway in, I caught another smell mixed into it, stale cigarette smoke. It was faint, one thread of it, then gone. I stopped on the logging trace and listened. Nothing. No crunch of another boot, no zipper, no cough, no beam slipping through branches. I told myself it could have drifted from the parking area, even though I had been walking almost an hour. I kept going. At the tree, I set my pack down and reached for the ratchet strap I kept, looped around the trunk behind a cluster of bark scales. I used a lightweight hang-on there and carried the seat and sticks in with me, but I left one old strap tucked back in the crook of the tree because it saved time in the dark. When my hand found it, I knew somebody had touched it. That sounds dramatic now, and I would roll my eyes if somebody else said it to me, but it is the truth. If you use your hands for a living, you notice tension without thinking. The strap had been tightened one notch more than where I always left it. Not much. Just enough that I had to work 2 fingers under it to free the buckle. I stood there with the strap in my hand and looked around the tree with my headlamp off. No one was there. The beam from the moon came in gray through the timber. Everything looked fixed and still. My breath fogged up in front of me. I listened long enough for my ears to start inventing sounds. Then I told myself the cold had changed the tension and started setting up. I saw nothing that morning. Around 10, I climbed down and still hunted my way back toward the truck, then drove home thinking less about deer than I did that strap. The second time it happened was 4 days later. That morning, there was mud on the base of the tree. Not just ordinary mud. It had been dry and freezing all week. The ground was stiff. The trail in had a skin on it. But right at the trunk where I set my boots to climb, there were 2 dark wet smears with fresh leaf fragments stuck in them like somebody had stepped there after crossing water. I crouched and touched one with the back of my glove. Cold, soft, recent. What made it strange was that my approach did not cross anything wet, not enough to soak a boot, and if another hunter had come in from the opposite side, he would have had to push through thick laurel and slide down the bank behind the clearing. It could be done, but not quietly, and not without leaving sign. I circled wider than I ever had before that morning, looking for tracks, a broken branch, even orange fabric snagged on something. I found nothing except a place on a sapling 20 yards out, where the bark had been rubbed smooth at shoulder height, like a gloved hand had steadied itself there over and over. I sat longer that morning. The woods stayed dead quiet after sunrise. No squirrels, no turkeys scratching, no ravens moving over. Around 9:30, I heard what I thought was a stand creaking somewhere uphill, one of those tiny metal complaints that only carries when everything else is still. I looked that direction so hard my eyes watered. Nothing. 2 weekends later, I brought my friend Chris Bittner in with me. Not to my stand, but close enough that he could hunt the drainage below and maybe tell me if he saw anybody working that ridge. Chris and I have known each other since high school. He drives a fuel truck now, built like a refrigerator, steady as they come. If something strange is happening, and I start thinking maybe I am imagining it, Chris is the kind of guy I want around because he has no patience for drama, including mine. We parked before daylight, geared up, and started in. When we got near the split where he would peel off downhill, I stopped him and said, "Do me a favor. If you see another light up there after legal starts, text me." He gave me a look. "You got somebody crowding you?" "I do not know." "That sounds like no. I just want to know." He adjusted the rifle on his shoulder and squinted past me into the dark woods. "Public land, Dan. You cannot marry a tree." "I know that." "Then what are you asking me?" I almost said it then. About the strap, the mud, the cigarette smell. I heard how it would sound, and decided against it. Nothing, I said. Forget it, he grinned. You miss another buck. I do not want to hear that your ghost hunter bumped him. He went down the slope, laughing quietly to himself. I wish I had made him come see the sight in daylight. That morning, when I reached the tree, there was a scuff on the bark above my stand height. It was fresh, pale against the dark outer bark, maybe 6 feet higher than where my platform usually sat. I stepped back and looked up. There were no screw-in steps, no climbing pegs, no strap hanging, no stand, nothing but the trunk rising straight into branches and a woven ceiling of limbs above the clearing. I remember feeling annoyed more than afraid then, like somebody was messing with me in a way I could not prove, and that somehow made it worse. A prank with no audience. At 7-Eleven, my phone vibrated in my chest pocket. Chris. No lights. Heard one shot south side. You see anything? I typed back with cold fingers. No. A minute later, another text came in. You smoking now? I stared at it. What? Can smell it from below every now and then. My mouth went dry enough that I had to swallow twice before I could answer. Not me. No response. I sat there until 9:30, barely moving, my eyes drifting uphill every few seconds. I never smelled the cigarette that morning. Not once. But just before I climbed down, I noticed ash on a dead leaf behind my tree. One tiny gray flake, delicate as fish skin. I showed Chris when we met back at the trucks. He looked at the leaf in my palm, then at me. Could have blown in. From where? He shrugged. Somebody encamped down the road. You want me to lie? I want you to tell me if this is normal. He studied me for a second. No, it is not normal. But none of it is enough yet. Enough for what? For you to stop going in there alone, maybe. I laughed at that because I did not want him hearing the other option in my voice. The next week, I went back with the specific goal of tearing the whole area apart in daylight after the morning sit. I took my time climbing in and marked every detail around me. A split beach on the left edge of the opening, a deadfall with moss glowing almost bright green on the far side, a broken hemlock top lodged in another tree uphill. Nothing new. At sunrise, a thin ground fog moved through the shelf below me. It came and went in ribbons, low enough that deer legs would have been hidden if anything crossed. The kind of morning hunters dream about. Perfect wind, perfect cold, good visibility. I should have been focused on game. Instead, I kept looking uphill. By noon, I had seen nothing except one fox squirrel and a pileated woodpecker that landed on a trunk so close behind me I heard its claws first. I climbed down, shouldered my pack, and began searching. I found the trail first. Not a real trail, more like a faint habit. 3 flattened spots through the leaves, then another, each one far enough apart that whoever made them knew how to move quietly. They came from the uphill side, where I never approached because it was steeper and choked with mountain laurel. I followed them 20 yards to a narrow notch between 2 boulders, where the ground dropped off sharply. Beyond that notch, tucked in among the trunks at an angle I had somehow never seen from below, was another tree. There was a stand in it. I did not understand what I was looking at for a second, because it sat higher than any sensible hunter would place one there, maybe 20 feet up, and it was not visible from the clearing, unless you were standing exactly where I was. The platform was dark, old-looking, and narrow. The kind of cheap steel hang-on you saw 10 or 15 years ago before better designs got common. No orange on it, no fresh straps I could see, just a black shape and branches above my line. I stood frozen in that notch, with my hand on my rifle sling. I had hunted that site 3 seasons. I had scouted it in summer. I had watched that hillside in rain, in snow, in leaf drop, in green up. I should have seen that stand before, if it had been there. I wanted to walk over and inspect it. I wanted to get the serial number off the platform if there was one, or cut the rotten thing down and drag it to the Game Commission office if it looked abandoned. Instead, I stayed where I was and looked at the tree beneath it. No climbing sticks, no ladder, no new strap marks around the trunk at eye level, just leaves and wet dark dirt. I did not go to it. I wish I could tell you that was some wise instinct, that something in me knew not to get closer. The truth is more embarrassing. I suddenly felt like, if I moved toward that tree, somebody would stand up in it. I backed out the way I had come and walked all the way to the truck without once looking over my shoulder. That night I told my wife, Erin, that I was thinking about trying a different public tract. She was unloading the dishwasher when I said it. "Thought you loved that spot." I do. So what changed? I leaned against the counter and watched our kitchen window reflect the dark yard back at us. Might be too much traffic this year. She nodded, like that made sense, but she has known me since we were 19. She can hear a lie even when it is mostly true. Do not get stubborn out there, she said. I am not. That means you are. I smiled, and she did not smile back. The last morning I hunted that stand, the temperature had climbed just enough to soften the ground. Not rain, not a thaw, just damp cold. Clouds sealed the sky, so the woods stayed dark longer than usual. I almost turned around twice on the walk in. There was no dramatic reason, no noise, no shape crossing the road, just a pressure in me that kept saying you do not need to be here this bad. I ignored it because I had ignored things like that before and ended up watching deer step through a lane I would have missed if I had listened to my nerves. Hunters are superstitious, but most of us pride ourselves on not being ruled by it. When I got close, I saw there were fresh leaves kicked against the base of my tree. Not scattered, piled, almost, as if somebody had swept the area with a boot. My stand strap was looser this time, not tighter. I remember that detail clearly because it was the first time I felt anger stronger than uncertainty. It was one thing to wonder if somebody had been there. It was another to know he wanted me to know. I climbed anyway. The woods that morning had the kind of silence you only get right before weather changes. No breeze at all. My own coat sounded loud when I shifted. Every few minutes, I found myself staring up into the dull gray spaces between limbs on the higher slope, waiting for movement. At 6:58, I heard one soft, metallic tick above me. Not close enough to be on my stand. Somewhere uphill. I stopped breathing. Nothing followed it. At 7:16 came another sound. Not metal this time, but a faint rubber stretch and settle, like an old strap taking weight. I should have left then. Instead, I sat with my rifle across my lap and watched the edge of the ridge until my eyes hurt. Dawn worked into the trees slowly, turning trunks from flat black into wet brown columns. The clearing below me took shape. The split beech on the left. The mossed deadfall. The crooked hemlock top. Then I saw it. Movement in the stand above mine. Not the whole body at first. Just a slight shift of a shoulder shape where no shoulder shape should have been. High and still among the branches. Whoever it was had been facing the clearing. Not me. He moved one arm, slow as a branch settling after wind, though there was no wind, and turned his head enough that the side of it caught the first weak light. No orange. No face I could make out. Just a man-shaped darkness in the higher stand, watching the same opening I was. I do not know how long I sat there looking at him before he looked down. It could not have been more than a second, but it stretched. I never saw eyes. I just knew he had turned and found me because some part of his outline changed in a way that made every muscle in me lock hard enough to ache. Then he lifted one hand, not waving, not pointing, just raising it slowly to the trunk beside him, like he was steadying himself. I climbed down too fast and nearly missed the third stick with my right boot. I did not care. I hit the ground, yanked the last strap loose with shaking hands, stuffed gear into my pack without securing half of it, and started out, not running. Running in the woods gets you hurt. But moving as fast as I could, while keeping my feet under me, I never heard anyone behind me. That was worse. I would have preferred pursuit to whatever that silence was. At the notch between the boulders, I stopped and looked uphill toward the tree, where I had seen the stand. Nothing was there. No platform, no shape, no dark block of steel among branches. Just the tree, bare and straight. I stood there panting steam into the cold, and told myself I was at the wrong angle, wrong light, wrong tree. I climbed 3 yards higher on the slope and looked again. Nothing. I do not mean empty in a vague sense. I mean there was no stand in that tree at all. I went to it then because terror had tipped over into something almost mechanical. I needed a fact. Any fact. The ground under the trunk was soft enough to hold sign. No ladder marks. No fresh prints. No bark scuffs from climbing sticks. No cut branches. No cigarette butts. No dropped shell. No food wrapper. Nothing. There was not even an old ratchet strap biting into the bark the way abandoned stands usually leave behind. Just wet leaves, black dirt, and one root snaking out of the ground like a vein. I checked my own tree before leaving the area. Same thing. The leaves at the base were disturbed from my climb down, but there were no second tracks. No boot marks where someone could have stood above or behind me. No sign of another hunter entering or leaving. Nothing to support what I had just seen except the fact that I had seen it. When I got back to the truck, I sat with the doors locked and the rifle across my lap until my hand stopped shaking enough to text Chris. "You free?" he called instead. "What happened?" "I am done with that spot." Silence for a second. "Why?" "There was somebody above me." "Above you where?" "In a stand." "You saw a stand?" "I saw him in it. He let that sit. And now?" "Now there is no stand there." He exhaled through his nose the way he does when trying to decide whether I am messing with him. "Dan, I know what I saw. I am not saying you did not." "Then what are you saying?" He did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was lower. "I am saying do not go back there by yourself, and I am saying maybe do not go back there at all. I never did." A few weeks later, after season ended, I pulled up satellite imagery and topographic layers on my laptop, trying to make the terrain behave rationally. I wanted to prove to myself there had been another access route, another tree, another explanation. The more I looked, the less it helped. The ridge was the ridge. The notch was the notch. The shelf lay exactly where I knew it did. On a map, the whole thing seemed too small to hold the kind of uncertainty I had felt inside it. In late spring, I called the local game commission office and asked if there had been complaints about illegal stands or somebody harassing hunters near that tract. The officer I spoke to said no. Then he asked what area exactly. I told him. He was quiet for a moment and said, "You are not the first person to quit that ridge." I sat up straighter. "Why?" "Nothing official. That is not what I asked." Another pause. Papers moving on his end, or maybe he just wanted me to think that. Couple guys, over the years, said they felt watched up there. One older hunter claimed there was a stand he could never find twice. Another told me he smelled smoke every morning and never found a camp. Nobody had anything actionable. He gave a little laugh after that, meant to flatten the whole thing back into harmless talk. It did not work. "You still hunt?" he asked. "Yeah." "Then hunt somewhere that lets you go home tired instead of thinking." That stuck with me because it was exactly right. Good woods can wear you out. They can humble you, frustrate you, make you cold and bored and hungry. They should not follow you home. It has been 4 years since I sat that stand site. I still hunt. Different state game lands, private permission when I can get it, one trip west that nearly froze me out of a blind in Ohio. Normal stories. Misses, close calls, busted wind, deer showing up where they are not supposed to. The usual. But every season, sometime in late October, when the mornings start smelling like wet bark and old leaves again, I think about that ridge in Allegheny and the shape of that second stand above mine. Not because I believe something impossible was living up there. What bothers me more is the possibility that it was a man. A real one. Someone who knew that hillside better than I did, who could move in and out without sign, who had watched me enough to tighten and loosen a strap just to prove he could. Someone patient enough to sit above me in the dark and wait for enough daylight that I could finally see him there. Sometimes that explanation feels worse than any other. The part I cannot get past, even now, is what happened after I looked away to climb down. If there was a man in that tree, he had to get out. He had to descend from somewhere. He had to touch the ground. And if he did it without leaving one mark in soft earth, without snapping one twig, without making one sound I heard over my own breathing. I still see that hand going up slowly beside him, not waving, not threatening, just resting there, like he had all the time in the world, like he knew the woods well enough to disappear before my boots ever hit the leaves. That is the part that stays with me. Not the fear, the certainty. That, for at least 3 mornings before I finally saw him, and maybe longer, somebody had been in those trees above me while I climbed in before daylight believing I was alone. Story 2. What came up the trunk? I have never liked when people talk about the woods like they are fair. You hear it from guys who have hunted all their lives, the older ones especially. They say if you do everything right, the woods usually give you a fair chance. Read the wind, move slow, know your lanes, respect the animal, respect the land, and most of the time things work the way they are supposed to. Maybe not in your favor, but at least by rules you understand. That has never been true everywhere. Some places only look fair because nothing has tested you there yet. The Tensas River Basin in northeastern Louisiana has a way of making you feel small before daylight. It is flat in the way deep woods can be flat and still feel claustrophobic. Water sits where you do not expect it. Cypress knees rise out of black ground like knuckles. Palmetto and switch cane close off one direction, then open another. The timber is huge in places, straight and old, and when the air hangs damp under the canopy, it feels less like a forest than the inside of something living and patient. My name is Corey Embry. I was 32 when this happened. I grew up outside Monroe, did a few years in the Army, came back, and took a job running heavy equipment for a road contractor. Hunting had always been the one thing I trusted myself in. I am not some internet tough guy, and I am not one of those men who think a camo pattern makes them a philosopher. I just knew how to sit still, how to read sign, and how to spend a morning alone without needing a podcast in my ear to prove I existed. Bow season especially. I liked that it punished impatience. The stand I was in that morning was a climber I had used for years, an old steel one with a faded padded seat and enough scratches on the frame to tell its own history. It was heavier than the newer models, but I trusted it. There's a lot to be said for gear, in the dark, by touch. Every strap, every cable, every place the platform bit bark when you settled your weight into it. I had hunted from that stand in pine flats, hardwood bottoms, field edges, and once in a pecan grove on a buddy's family place. It had become part of the ritual. I did not think about it much, which is probably why what happened that morning still bothers me. The stand did exactly what it was supposed to do. It kept me alive just long enough for the rest of the world to stop making sense. I had gone in early because the weather had finally broken. The heat had backed off after a front, and the temperature dropped into that thin, cool range Louisiana gets for about 5 minutes before dawn in the fall. Not cold by northern standards, but enough to put edge into the air and get deer on their feet earlier. The place I was hunting sat near a narrow transition where acorn-producing hardwoods met a wetter run of low ground. There was a trail cutting through there, not a giant obvious one, but a consistent path with tracks, rubs, and droppings, enough to tell me bucks were easing through just after first light before bedding deeper in. I parked on a shell road while it was still fully dark, killed the truck, and sat for a second, listening to the ticking engine settle. No other vehicles, no distant doors, no voices, just frogs from farther off in the water, and something moving once through leaves beyond the ditch, too heavy to be a squirrel, too casual to care about me. I stepped out, shouldered my pack, slung my bow, and started down the trail with my red lamp on low. The basin at night does not sound like other woods. It is layered. Insects, frogs, the occasional splash from something easing off a bank, the dry clicking chatter of things in reeds, and above all of it, that padded silence under the trees where sound seems to travel only if it wants to. My boots sank a little in the softer spots. Not enough to slow me, just enough to keep me paying attention. I reached the tree I wanted, an old straight hardwood with bark rough enough for the climber to bite well, and started setting up. Everything about climbing into a stand before daylight is mechanical if you have done it enough. Attach the lower platform, cinch the upper section, seat the cables, test the angle, clip the bow line, secure the harness, climb, sit, repeat. In the dark, routine is calm. You do not think about height, you think about sequence. I got about 20 feet up, maybe a little less, and settled in. From there I could see one main lane opening through the timber and two narrower ones where anything moving would show itself in fragments. The tree widened slightly above me, which blocked some of my backward view, but that is normal in a climber. You pick your lanes and live with what you cannot see. I texted my wife, Jenna, a thumbs up and the words "in stand," then switched my phone to silent and tucked it into my chest pocket. The woods were starting to gray around the edges. The dark was thinning, but not enough yet for depth. Everything looked farther away than it was. The air smelled like wet bark and black water and the sour mineral scent that comes up from mud before dawn. Somewhere off to my left, a barred owl called, and another one answered from deeper in. I remember thinking it was going to be a good morning. The first sound at the base of my tree was soft enough that I almost ignored it. Just a scrape, then a pause. I assumed armadillo at first. They root around with no concern for the world and make more noise than something their size should. Then I heard it again. Slower this time, followed by the sound of leaves being pressed rather than shuffled. Wait. Intentional wait. I leaned forward and tried to angle my headlamp down through the slats of the platform, but I had already switched it off and clipped it to the seat frame. I did not want to throw a white light around the woods, this close to legal shooting time, over some animal moving through. The sound circled once around the trunk. Not fast, not hesitant either. Just deliberate, one heavy step, then another, the leaves compressing with a damp sound under whatever was making it. I went still. There are plenty of normal things that can sound bigger in the dark. A hog, a deer nosing through acorns. Even a raccoon can surprise you if it starts climbing nearby. But something about the rhythm below me did not fit with passing movement. It was too focused. The steps stayed close to the trunk. I could feel them more than hear them by the end of the circle, tiny vibrations traveling up through bark and metal into the soles of my boots. I looked down through the gap beside the seat and saw nothing except darkness pressed against the tree. Then it exhaled. Not a hiss, not a grunt. A deep, wet burst of breath from directly underneath me that carried hot enough through the cool air for me to feel the difference on my face even from up there. I eased my paw into my hand without standing. My first stupid thought was black bear, followed immediately by the second stupid thought, not here. People hear Louisiana and think alligator, hogs, snakes. They do not picture black bears unless they know the right parts of the state. I knew enough to know they existed in the basin, and that the population had been building back for years. I had seen sign before, tracks in mud, claw marks on soft bark. I had never seen one in person out there. Another breath came up from below, then the scrape of claws on bark. The sound of claws on a tree trunk is one of those noises that tells your body what to fear before your mind catches up. It is dry and ugly and intimate, close enough to imagine. A tearing drag, then a pause as weight shifted. I stood too quickly, and the stand gave a light metallic creak under me. Whatever was below went still. I could hear my own breathing now, louder than the woods. The harness strap across my chest felt too tight. I moved one boot half an inch, and realized exactly how bad my position was. In a climbing stand, especially an older one, your movement is limited by the tree, the seat frame, your tether, and the fact that you are standing on a small, suspended platform, 20 feet up, in low light, with a bow that needs space to draw. Straight down is not an easy shot. Behind you is worse. If something comes up the trunk, you do not have clean angles. You have panic and mechanics fighting each other. I bent and tried to peer over the platform edge. At first, all I saw was the bark and the dark ground beyond. Then a shape moved against the trunk, and two pale claws hooked for a second into a seam in the bark before slipping down. My mouth went dry. I could not see the whole animal from where I stood, only parts of it. A shoulder rolling, dark fur catching what little light there was, the top of a head too broad to be anything else. It was not huge in the storybook sense, not some grisly nightmare. It was worse, because it was real-sized, real enough to fit into the world I knew, real enough that every part of my brain started calculating weight and reach and leverage. It moved around the trunk again, out of sight, then came back. It was not leaving. I did the worst thing you can do when fear and reason arrive at the same time. I compromised between them. I made noise, but not enough. I shouted, "Hey," loud and sharp, then hit the side of the stand once with my palm. The bear dropped back to the ground. For one clean second, I thought that was the end of it. Then I heard it circle wider through the leaves and come back faster. The impact on the trunk shivered up through the stand. Claws hit bark hard enough this time that bark scales broke loose and fell. The whole tree carried the movement. The bear huffed once, angry now, or excited, or maybe only committed in a way I had not understood until then. I barked out another yell and kicked the tree with my boot heel. "Get out of here. Go." That is the kind of thing people say in stories when they do not know what else to say to an animal that has stopped behaving like a background detail and started acting like a problem. It dropped again, but not far. I could hear it at the base, moving, testing, brushing the trunk with its body. There was a musky smell in the air now, rank and warm, mixed with damp fur and old swamp water. My stomach tightened so hard it hurt. I tried to get my release clipped, on the bowstring, with one hand while keeping my balance with the other, but my fingers were not listening. They felt swollen and stupid. I kept thinking, if it gets high enough, where do I put an arrow? Chest, shoulder, head? Could I even angle the bow enough before it was on the platform? I have replayed this next part more times than I can count. There was a pause below me long enough that I thought maybe it had finally moved off. Then I heard a sound I did not understand at first. A rapid, dry series of scratches, and the trunk shook harder than before. It was climbing for real, not leaning on the tree, not swatting at bark. Climbing. I lurched backward into the seat frame, and looked down just as the bear came into view under the platform. Its forelegs were wrapped around the trunk. The head was up now, mouth open a little, tongue just visible, and it was hauling itself higher with a strength that did not look possible until you see it up close. The claws dug, slipped, caught again. Bark came down in strips. I made a noise I do not remember deciding to make. Not a yell exactly, more like my body forcing sound out because staying silent had become impossible. I slammed my boot down on the platform and banged the bow riser against the metal rail. The stand rang out in the timber. I shouted, cursed, hit it again. The bear stopped for half a second, looked up, and I saw its face clearly enough then to know it was not bluffing and not confused. It was looking at me. One paw reached higher. The claws came over the lip of the platform beneath my right boot. There are moments fear becomes so complete that your mind sheds every unnecessary thought and leaves only movement. I yanked my foot back, jammed the bow down between us, and brought the lower cam hard against the paw and metal edge with all the force I had. The bowstring twanged uselessly. The impact was ugly and wrong, and it worked only because it surprised the animal as much as it surprised me. The bear dropped, not all the way, just enough to lose its purchase. It slid, bark tearing under it, then hit the ground with a crash of leaves and one heavy body thud I felt through the stand. I screamed then, full volume, wordless, every ounce of air I had. I kicked the tree, pounded the stand, and kept screaming until my throat felt flayed. Somewhere in the middle of it, the bear ran. I heard it crash off through palmetto and low brush, snapping stems, splashing once in water farther left, then nothing. The silence that followed was not relief. It was disbelief. I stood there shaking so hard the stand vibrated with me. My bow was still in my hand, and I realized the arrow had fallen off the rest at some point. I could not remember whether I had knocked one at all. The woods around me were growing lighter by the second. Ordinary shapes returning to their proper dimensions, and that almost made it worse. Dawn was making the place look normal again while I stood there trying not to lose control of my legs. I called Jenna first, because fear makes people do things out of order. She picked up on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Corey, there was a bear." No response for half a second. "What?" At my stand, it climbed the tree. That woke her all the way up. "Are you hurt?" "I do not think so." "You do not think so?" "I am not bitten. I am not bleeding. I just..." I looked down at my hands shaking against the bow grip. "I need a second. Get down and get out of there. I am waiting." For what? I did not have a good answer. For the bear to come back. For my legs to work. For reality to catch up. "I am waiting until it is brighter." She started telling me to call somebody. Call game and fish. Call my brother Mason. Call anybody. I said I would, and hung up because I could hear the panic rising in her voice, and knew it would fuse with mine if I stayed on the phone. I texted Mason next because he lived 30 minutes away and had hunted that basin with me before. "Need you at Shell Road now." Bear climbed my tree. He called immediately. "Are you serious?" "Yes." "You shot it?" "No chance." "Are you hit?" "No." A pause then. "Stay put. I am coming." I stayed in that stand another 45 minutes. By full daylight, the woods had turned almost offensively beautiful. Sun filtered through the hardwoods in pale strips. A wood duck flew somewhere over the slough, making that high whistling sound with its wings. Squirrels started up. You could have dropped another hunter into the scene then, and he would have thought I was in one of those perfect, quiet morning spots people post pictures of online. When I finally climbed down, I did it slowly enough to hate myself for how careful I had become. The first thing I saw at the base of the tree was bark shredded in pale curls and strips all around the trunk. Fresh gouges ran upward in ragged lines. The leaves were churned dark. One muddy print sat half-formed off to the side, where the ground held it better, broad and unmistakable. I found my arrow 10 feet away in the leaves. Then I saw the claw marks higher up. I had expected them to stop at the level where I had struck the paw away from the platform. Instead, there were fresh, vertical slashes on the bark, extending above the underside of the stand by another foot, maybe more, as if during the slide, or the scramble down, the animal had gotten even higher than where I had seen it. I stared at that part of the trunk for a long time. The image I had carried in my head, paw on the metal edge, bare below me, had been the version my mind could survive in the moment. The tree was telling me something worse. At some point in that chaos, it had almost been level with me. Maybe it had been for less than a second. Maybe I only missed it because fear narrows vision into whatever your body thinks it can still solve. Mason found me standing there, with my hand on one of the gouges. He came in too fast, crunching leaves, breathing hard from the walk. Corey. I turned, and for the first time since it happened, my control almost broke. There is something about seeing somebody you know after being afraid alone that makes the fear stop being useful. My face must have shown more than I wanted because Mason did not joke, did not ask questions right away. He just looked at the tree, the stand, the bark torn open, and said, "Jesus Christ, we photographed everything. The marks, the print, the base of the tree, the stand. Mason wanted me to send it all in and report it." I did later that day. The wildlife officer who called me back asked careful questions in a tone that made it clear he believed me, but also that a black bear climbing toward a hunter in a stand was unusual enough to be filed under things people would rather not test twice. When I got home, Jenna met me in the driveway. She hugged me so hard, the zipper of my jacket dug into my chin. Then, she held me at arm's length and said, "You are done there." Yeah, you are done in that whole area. Probably. No, not probably. I remember laughing at that, not because it was funny, but because the authority in her voice felt like a rope thrown to somebody still half in the water. For the next few nights, I barely slept. Every time I started to drift off, I heard claws on bark again. Not in dreams exactly, more like memory replaying itself at full volume the second my body relaxed enough to let it in. I would jolt awake with my hands flexed and my jaw aching from how hard I had clenched it. Once, around 3 a.m, Jenna found me standing at the kitchen sink, staring out into our dark backyard. "What are you doing?" "Nothing." She came up behind me and rested her chin against my shoulder. "You are home." I nodded, but the truth was, part of me was still up that tree, stuck in the second before the paw came over the platform. What bothered me the most was not even the size or the aggression. It was the focus. People like to imagine that wild animals either scare easy or charge like machines. This was neither. That bear spent time at the base of my tree learning something, testing, returning, adjusting. It was not chaos. It felt almost procedural, and that was what made it hard to reduce later into a story I could control. If it had been a quick charge and retreat, I could have filed it under bad luck and animal behavior. What unsettled me was the sense that for several minutes I had been an object in the woods, being evaluated by something stronger than me. A week later, Mason talked me into going back with him. Not to hunt, just to look. I did not want to. I said yes anyway, because pride is a disease men dress up as reason. We walked in around midday, carrying sidearms and talking too loudly, like volume could keep the memory from arriving first. The tree looked ordinary from a distance. The marks were still there when we got close, though the bark had darkened around the edges, and insects had started finding the exposed wood. Mason stood under the stand and looked up. "I do not know how you stayed in there after it dropped. I did not know if it was still there." He nodded slowly. "You think it was predatory?" "I think it wandered up the tree. That is not the same thing." "No," I said. "It is not." He crouched by the base and touched one of the gouges. "You notice this?" "What?" He pointed to a second set of scratches lower on the trunk. Older ones, faded but there once you saw them. Not as fresh, not as deep, but running in a similar pattern. I stared at them. "Maybe from another season," he said. "Maybe." We both knew what I was thinking. Had it done this before? Same tree, same angle, same curiosity sharpened by repetition. Had another hunter sat up there listening to sounds below and told himself it was nothing until it was not? I never hunted that tree again. I still bow hunt. I still hunt from stands. I still go into the dark before daylight, with my heart beating a little harder than it does anywhere else in life. But there are things I check now that I never used to think about. Not just sign and wind and lane. Escape. Space. What is below me? What can come up after me? How boxed in I am once I commit to a trunk in low light. I carry a brighter light than I used to. I make more noise when I climb. I pay attention to old claw marks. I respect trees less as protection than I once did. That morning in Tensis stripped away an assumption I had carried my whole life, that elevation equals safety. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it only makes you the last stop on the trunk. The worst part came a month later. I was cleaning mud out of the climber in my garage before putting it away for the season. There was bark wedged into the frame, leaves packed into one corner of the platform, and dried mud on the bottom bars where I had set it down. I turned the stand to inspect the rail where the bear's paw had come over. There were 4 shallow scores in the metal beneath the chipped paint. I just stood there looking at them. I had been telling the story to myself in the version where I reacted in time. Where the paw came over, I hit it, it fell. Simple sequence. Hard enough to live with. Those marks said the claws had held longer than I remembered. Long enough to drag and bite into steel before letting go. I ran my thumb over them and felt how narrow the grooves were, how little separated that platform from a body already coming level with me in the dark. That night I dreamed I was back in the stand, except this time when I looked down there was nothing at the base of the tree. No sound, no movement. Just the certainty that it was already climbing from the blind side where I could not see it. I woke up before dawn and sat on the edge of the bed listening to my own house settle. Jenna stirred and asked, "Again?" "Yeah." She reached over without opening her eyes and took my wrist in her hand until my breathing slowed. What people do not understand about fear like that is it does not end when the danger passes. It moves into your body and waits. In a smell, in the scrape of a rake on bark, in the metallic ring of something struck unexpectedly. It teaches your nerves new shortcuts. Even now, years later, if I am up a ladder stand in half light and hear anything deliberate at the base of the tree, my whole body goes cold in one instant. Not imagination, not nerves, just memory arriving faster than thought. I do not tell the story often because it always sounds bigger out loud than it did in the moment, and the moment already felt impossible enough, but it happened. It happened in a real place, on a normal morning, with legal shooting light just beginning to show itself through hardwoods, and one man alone in a tree believing height had solved the problem of being on the ground with something stronger than him. The basin looked beautiful when I walked in that day. Still, damp, honest. That is what I remember most clearly now. Not because it comforts me, but because it did not warn me. That whole bottomland held itself together in perfect quiet, while something below me kept circling the trunk, deciding whether to leave me where I was or come up after me. And when it did come up, it climbed like the tree had always belonged to it. Story 3. Something answered my call. I learned to hunt elk from my cousin Shane Voss, which meant I learned half of it correctly and half of it the hard way. Shane was 10 years older than me, broad-shouldered, burned dark by the sun year-round, and the kind of man who never sounded impressed by anything, not because he was miserable, but because he had spent too much of his life outdoors to waste energy on drama. He worked for a fencing outfit most of the year in western South Dakota, did roofing when that slowed down, and every September he disappeared into the Black Hills like he was reporting to church. I was 30 when this happened. I lived in Rapid City then, worked at a collision repair shop, and still felt like I had one foot in everybody else's life. Hunting was the only place I ever felt fully present. No scrolling, no messages, no noise from town, no fluorescent hum, no customer asking how much longer their truck was going to be in primer. Just air, distance, and the clean pressure of paying attention. The Black Hills are beautiful in a way that can fool you. People hear South Dakota and picture open country, badlands, wind, long sight lines. The hills are something else. Dark timber, deep cuts, rock shelves, old mining traces, meadows that open unexpectedly and close just as fast, all of it layered in pine scent and cold shade. Sound behaves strangely there. A branch snapping on one ridge can seem close enough to touch. A voice from below can go flat and directionless until you turn the wrong way and walk straight into a drainage. Elk country has a habit of making a grown man feel smart one minute and completely misplaced the next. Shane and I had hunted together enough that we did not need to talk much once boots hit dirt. We had our habits. He liked to swing lower and wider, working contour lines and glassing edges. I preferred moving slower through the timber and setting up where trails narrowed. For elk, especially in country like that, we used locator calls and radios more than I used to admit to people who think every good hunt should happen in sacred silence. Not constantly, not enough to sound lazy, just enough to keep from drifting too far apart in rough country where a 5-minute detour can turn into a lost hour. That morning, we were hunting west of Pactola, in a section of national forest Shane had been exploring for a couple of seasons. It was not one of those magic places where elk stood around, posing in every meadow. It was better than that. Hard country with sign, rubs, tracks crossing old 2-tracks, fresh droppings along benches, wallows not far off from dark north-facing timber. The kind of place where you could believe there were animals there, even when you had not seen one yet. We parked in the dark, where an old Forest Service road widened just enough for 2 trucks. Nobody else was there. No headlamps moving through the trees, no doors slamming in the distance, none of the stuff that takes a little shine off public land before your day even starts. The air had that sharp edge it gets up there right before sunrise, cold enough to redden your knuckles but not your bones. Ponderosa bark carried that dry, warm smell even in the dark. Every breath I took felt cleaner than anything in town. Shane stood by the tailgate, sipping coffee from a dented thermos cup and looking up at the black line of timber on the slope above us. "You swing too high and they'll scent you," he said. "I know. You know in theory. Different thing." I smiled. "You want to come hold my hand?" He looked at me over the cup. "I'm serious." "I know." He nodded once and lowered the cup. "If you get a reply and it sounds wrong, do not chase it fast." I laughed a little because I thought he meant young bulls answering weird, or another hunter with a bugle tube trying too hard. "What does wrong mean?" He shrugged. "You'll know." That was classic Shane, saying something that sounded almost meaningful and then refusing to explain it into usefulness. We checked radios, both of us on low volume with earpieces, shouldered packs, and started in while the sky was still colorless. The plan was simple. We would climb the first long timbered rise together, then split at a deadfall line where the ridge forked. Shane would work the lower contour toward a broad draw cut with game trails. I would stay higher in the thicker timber and move toward a bench where we had seen fresh sign the previous afternoon. If one of us got into elk or found better movement, we would check in. Simple plans are the easiest ones to get lost inside. The climb warmed me fast. Needles softened every footstep. The dark thinned enough for trunks to separate themselves from shadow. A squirrel broke cover somewhere above me and scolded into the gray. We reached the deadfall line around first usable light. Shane crouched by a cluster of tracks in damp soil, looked at them a second, then looked up at me. "Fresh enough. You want high or low?" He pointed low with 2 fingers. "I'll loop. You take the bench." Then he added, "Do not get in a hurry if they answer." I gave him a look. "You planning to say that every 10 minutes?" "If that's what it takes." That was the last normal conversation we had that day. I watched him move off downhill through the pines until the dark green swallowed him in sections. First his shoulders, then the orange patch on his pack, then nothing. I kept climbing. The bench sat along a broken run of timber, maybe 300 feet higher, narrow in spots, wider in others, with enough old deadfall and rock to break sightlines every few yards. Perfect place for elk to pass through slow and quiet. I found fresh droppings near a rub pine, stepped around them, and moved on. By then, enough light had worked into the woods that I could start calling. I waited until I hit a small opening between the trunks, gave one long locator bugle, and listened. The sound rolled away through the timber, bounced once off something stony farther out, and dissolved. For a few seconds there was nothing. Then an answer came back. It sounded like an elk. That was the problem. Not wrong enough to dismiss. Not right enough to trust. The pitch was close. The length was close. But the timing of it hit me oddly. Too fast, maybe. Like whatever answered had been waiting with its mouth already open. It came from farther north than I expected. From country rough enough that the reply should have felt softened by terrain. But it came in clean. I stood there listening to the last traces of it fade. Then I said into the radio, "Quiet." "You hear that?" Static hissed a moment. Then Shane's voice came back, low and clipped. "Heard something. North of me." "Could be." That answer irritated me because it sounded like him, but not with his usual shape to it. Shane always sounded settled, even on a radio. These words came too quick and too flat. "You moving?" I asked. A pause. "Stay high." That was reasonable enough. I did. I worked the bench slowly, taking 3 careful steps at a time, and glassing through the trunks more than actually moving. The Black Hills can hide a whole body behind one pine and reveal it only when it wants to. Elk do not have to be far away there. They only have to stand still. After 10 minutes, I bugled again. Another answer came back. This time it was closer, but not closer in the way something approaching should be. It sounded like it had relocated sideways, cutting across the slope faster than an animal should have been able to move without making noise. No branches snapping, no roll of rocks, no drum of hooves, just the call itself appearing from a different pocket of timber. I crouched by a deadfall and listened harder. Nothing moved. No birds lifting out. No squirrel chatter changing. The woods simply held the sound and then went back to being woods. I keyed the radio. "You still low?" Shane answered after a delay long enough to make me look downslope, as if I might somehow see him speaking. Yeah, the word was his. The cadence around it was not. I frowned. "You sound weird." Bad signal. That made enough sense that I let it go. I should not have. The morning kept unfolding in little pieces that failed to sit right. I found tracks in a patch of damp earth, where the bench narrowed against a rock shoulder. Elk tracks, fresh and clean at first glance. Then I realized the stride length did not match the line they were taking. Too neat, too evenly spaced, like something had stamped the shape without carrying the weight of a body over the ground. I stood over them longer than I should have, trying to talk myself out of how they felt. A little later, I found one rub on a young pine with fresh sap bright on the bark. Good sign. Normal sign. 20 yards farther on, another one. Then another, all lined up too neatly along the same angle, as if arranged to draw the eye. I did not like that thought the second it formed. This was not a haunted house. This was public ground full of animals, terrain, and the weird little coincidences a focused mind can build itself into a corner over. I knew that. I kept moving. Around mid-morning, the sky turned overcast enough to flatten the light. In open country, that might not matter. In dark timber, it changes everything. Depth disappears. Distance gets hard to judge. Gray bark and gray stone start copying each other until the woods feel more crowded, without actually changing. I stopped on the edge of a shallow drainage, choked with blowdown, and called again. Not a full bugle this time, more restrained location sound, enough to pull a reply without committing too much. Something answered immediately. Not from ahead, from below me. I turned so fast my boots slipped on loose needles. The reply had the shape of an elk call, but not the body of one. Too clipped at the end, too exact in the middle. It was like hearing somebody repeat a phrase in your own voice after listening to it only once. Close enough to force recognition, wrong enough to make your stomach tighten. I keyed the radio. "You move under me?" Static. Then Shane said, "I'm above you now." I stood very still. "What?" "Above you." I looked uphill through the timber. Nothing there but trunks and dark spaces between them. "You said you were low." No answer. I tried again. "Shane." Finally his voice came through, softer this time. "Stay where you are." That should have calmed me. It did the opposite. Shane did not give vague advice when he knew where he was. He gave landmarks, terrain, distance. "I'm near that split rock. I crossed the old road. I'm one draw over." He never said, "Stay where you are," unless he did not want to explain something. I backed off the drainage and moved toward a cluster of larger pines where I could see better in 3 directions. The forest floor there dipped gently into another run of darker timber. I listened. Wind had still not picked up. That bothered me most. Even a little breeze would have made the whole place less exact. Every sound that morning arrived too clean. I radioed again. "Give me a landmark." No reply. I waited, then tried. "Shane, answer me straight." This time, I got something that sounded like him taking a breath, close to the mic. Then, "I can see you." I turned in a full circle. Nobody. The trees around me stood quiet and evenly spaced, thick enough to hide a man if he froze, but not thick enough to hide one close, not from where I was. My mouth dried out all at once. Where? Static. Then, after a long second, do not go lower. I pulled the earpiece out and just held the radio in my hand, staring at it like the shape of it might explain anything. My first coherent thought was that some other hunter was messing with me on a similar channel, except the voice was Shane's. Not similar, his. The grain of it, the drawl he never quite lost, the flattening of vowels, but phrases were wrong. Placement was wrong. Timing was wrong. I should have started back toward the truck then. Instead, I did what people do in bad situations when they are still more curious than afraid. I tried to solve it. I moved uphill, not fast, angling toward where Shane claimed to be. The timber thickened. Deadfall forced me into slow zigzags. Twice I stopped, because I thought I saw tan hide through the trunks, but both times it was bark catching light strangely. My senses had gone from sharp to overcommitted. Every shape wanted to become evidence of something. Around noon, I found Shane's track. At least I thought I did. One clear boot print, in soft dirt beside a seep where water had blackened the ground. Size and tread matching his boots. I knelt beside it, fresh. The edges still held shape. I stood and looked for the next one. Nothing. No second print. No crushed needles. No broken twig. Just that one step, impressed into the wet ground, as if he had come straight down from the air and left the same way. I backed away from it without meaning to. The radio clicked against my palm, and a burst of static made me jump hard enough to feel it in my teeth. Then Shane's voice, quiet as if he were standing just behind my shoulder, said, "Declan." I whipped around. Nothing. I answered into the mic too fast. "Where are you?" A pause. Static crackle. "Come down." My whole body went cold. Not because the words were frightening by themselves, but because Shane had never once in all our years hunting told me to come down without saying down where. The phrase was empty. It had no ground under it. Just direction. I radioed back, forcing my voice steady. "Tell me where you are." No answer. Then, from somewhere ahead, and slightly right, through actual air this time, and not the radio, an elk call rose in the timber. I froze. It was close. Too close to have moved there without sound. The note lifted, wavered, and broke off in a way that made every hair on my arm stand. I have heard beginners call badly. I have heard hunters overdo it. This was stranger. It sounded practiced and empty at the same time, like a perfect shell. I do not know how long I stood there listening after it ended. Long enough to hear another one answer farther out. Then another, faint and left. A line of replies, one after the other, stepping away through the timber in near-perfect spacing. Not a herd, not natural movement, more like a trail of sound being laid out for me. I turned and started uphill for real then. The country got rough fast. Granite pushed through the soil in slanted shelves. Needles hid loose rock. Dead trees lay jackstrawed across one little cut and forced me to crawl through with my pack snagging. I stopped twice to listen for pursuit, though I do not know what I expected to hear. The whole forest had gone into a listening posture with me. No wind, no bird chatter, only the occasional shift of my own boot. By early afternoon, I hit an old 2-track, one of those half-abandoned forest service lanes grassed over in the middle. Relief came so hard it made me feel stupid. A road meant shape, orientation, something man-made enough to reduce panic. I got the map out of my pack and tried to fix my position. The road should have been lower. I studied the contour lines, then the terrain around me, then the map again. Unless I had drifted farther east than I believed, which would have taken more side-hilling than I remembered, I was standing on a road that did not fit where I had emerged. I keyed the radio. "Shane, answer me." Static. Then his voice, clearer than it had been all day. "You went the wrong way." I closed my eyes for 1 second. "Tell me where you are." No answer. "Shane, after a delay, I told you not to go lower." I didn't. Silence. Then, very softly, "You did." That was the moment I stopped thinking in terms of confusion and started thinking in terms of danger. Whether it was Shane or not, whatever was on that radio wanted me uncertain. Terrain I could deal with. Bad signal I could deal with. This was something else. Not supernatural in any grand dramatic sense, just wrong in a way that kept refusing every normal explanation long enough for fear to settle in. I started following the road west, because west would eventually hit a more traveled route, whether I was exactly where I thought or not. For half an hour, nothing happened. That was worse. I had time to think. Time to build possibilities I did not want. Shane injured somewhere. Another hunter with a radio close enough to bleed over, and a voice bizarrely similar to his. Me mishearing, misplacing, overreacting. The problem with too much thought in isolated country is that all explanations stay available long past usefulness. Then I found the pack. It hung from a snapped branch just off the road, chest high, swaying slightly in air I could not feel. Shane's pack. No question. Faded orange rain cover tucked into the side mesh, black tape around one shoulder strap where he had patched a tear the year before, a metal coffee cup clipped to the rear loop because he refused to use anything lighter, no matter how much I mocked him for it. Underneath the branch, leaned neatly against the trunk, was his rifle. The sling was wrapped once around the stock to keep it from slipping. It looked placed, not dropped. I stopped dead in the road. For a second, all I could hear was blood moving in my ears. Then I said his name out loud, not into the radio. Shane. The timber beyond the road stayed still. I stepped off the track and approached the tree slowly. No blood, no drag marks, no obvious sign of a struggle in the needles. The ground was too dry there to hold much, but even dry ground tells stories if enough force moves over it. This ground told none. I touched the pack. It was cold. Not frozen cold, not abandoned overnight cold, just cold enough to tell me it had been hanging there a while, maybe much longer than I wanted to believe. My radio crackled in my hand. Then Shane's voice said, very close and very calm, "Do not touch that." I dropped the pack and stumbled backwards so fast I nearly fell over the rifle. The voice had not come from the air. It had come through the speaker. But at the same time, somewhere deeper in the timber ahead, an elk call rose in answer, long and thinning at the end. Then another one farther off. Then another, moving away in a line, waiting. I do not know whether the smartest choice then would have been to stay put, start yelling, fire a shot, call law enforcement immediately, or sit down and think. I did none of those. I grabbed Shane's rifle and started backing down the road, with both guns feeling impossibly heavy in my hands. The radio hissed again. Declan. I shut it off, not turned the volume down, shut it off completely. The silence after that felt physical. I kept backing until the road bent enough that the hanging pack dropped out of sight behind timber. Then I turned and walked as fast as I could without losing control of my footing. After 100 yards, I was moving fast enough to call it running if anyone had seen me. When I finally hit the truck, the parking area was still empty, except for ours. Shane's truck sat exactly where he had left it at dawn. Coffee thermos on the console, keys still tucked above the driver's side rear tire, where he always hid the spare set. I locked myself in my cab and called 911. Search and rescue went out that evening. They found Shane after dark, not dead, not hurt badly, just sitting under a pine, a little over a mile from where I found the pack, dehydrated, disoriented, and furious. He had taken a bad step crossing loose rock mid-morning, rolled partway into a narrow cut, and lost his radio when it smashed against stone. He spent hours trying to climb out of the wrong side, then trying to orient himself in thick timber once he did. By the time they reached him, he was embarrassed and mean in that particular way only Shane could manage while being rescued. When he finally called me 2 days later, after rehydration and a night in the hospital for observation, the first thing he said was, "You took my rifle." I laughed once, hollow. "You're welcome." Then I told him everything, not the edited version. All of it. The radio replies, the calls, the pack hanging from the branch, the voice telling me not to touch it. He did not interrupt until I finished. Then he said, "My radio broke around 10. Dead broke. No battery, no transmission, nothing. I know what I heard. I'm telling you mine was dead. I know." Silence settled between us. Then he said, "I never left my pack hanging anywhere." I sat up straighter. "What?" "I had it on when they found me." My chest tightened. "No, I'm serious. You didn't leave it. Not for a minute?" "No." "Shane." I touched it. Another silence. Longer this time. Finally, he said, "Maybe you found another one. Exactly like yours?" He did not answer that. A week later, we met for coffee in Rapid City, and I made him bring the pack he had with him when they found him. Same tape on the strap, same orange cover, same metal cup clipped to the loop. I stared at it, sitting in the chair beside him, for so long he got irritated. "You going to drink that, or just look scared in public?" "You're telling me this never left your back?" "That's what I'm telling you." I told him again about the one on the branch, about the rifle below it, about the road. He listened with his jaw tight and his eyes down, the way he does when he's forcing himself to hear something he does not want to make room for. When I finished, he rubbed one hand over the back of his neck and said, "You remember what I told you that morning? If it sounds wrong, don't chase it fast." He nodded. "My granddad used to say some country gets used to answering back." I waited for him to smile after that, but he did not. I have gone over every possible explanation since. Another hunter on a similar frequency, somehow with a voice close enough to Shane's to fool me repeatedly. A second pack like his hanging in the wrong place at the exact wrong time. Me under stress, hearing patterns where none existed. Turning normal elk behavior into something sinister because I was alone in overcast timber and too deep into my own head. All of those explanations still sound possible in pieces. None of them explain the shape of the whole day. What stays with me most is not the radio. It is the answering calls moving away through the trees in that perfect line, each one just far enough ahead to keep me following if I wanted to. Not driving me, not chasing me, just offering the next point in the dark timber like stepping stones. I think about how easily I might have gone after them if I had not found that road when I did, or if the voice on the radio had used better landmarks, or if curiosity had won out over fear by even a few more minutes. I still hunt elk. I still carry a radio if I'm in rough country with somebody. But I do two things now that I never used to do. First, I agree on exact phrases beforehand, real check-ins, real landmarks, things a familiar voice alone cannot fake. Second, if something answers me in the timber, and my body knows it is wrong before my mind can explain why, I do not stand there trying to be rational for the sake of my pride. I leave. People like to think fear is primitive, that it drags us away from logic. Sometimes it is the only honest thing in the woods. Because there are places, and I believe this now more than I can comfortably explain, where the country listens long enough to learn the sounds you trust most. And if it gets them close enough, if it finds the right voice, the right call, the right shape of your own name carried through timber, it does not need to chase you at all. It only needs to keep answering until you start walking toward it on purpose. You have reached the end of the hunt, the point where the woods go still, the last light leaves the timber, and the places that seemed ordinary at sunrise begin to feel far more dangerous in memory than they did while they were happening. A familiar stand site, a climbing stand before daylight, a locator call sent into dark timber with the assumption that if something answers back, it still belongs to the world in some normal way. But if anything followed you out of these stories, if any image stayed with you longer than it should have, it is because the horror was never only in the woods. It was in the moment each hunter realized the woods had stopped feeling neutral. A man named Dan Earnhardt, returning to a secluded stand site in Allegheny National Forest, Pennsylvania, where the smallest changes around his tree began to reveal that he was not the only one using that clearing, and may never have been as alone there as he believed. A bow hunter named Corey Embry, climbing into a stand before sunrise in the Tensas River Basin of northeastern Louisiana, where the sound circling the base of his tree turned into something far worse the moment it stopped passing by and started coming up after him. And Declan Wells, hunting elk in the Black Hills National Forest of South Dakota, where calls, radio check-ins, and movement in the timber slowly stopped feeling like part of the hunt and started feeling like something was trying to lead him deeper by using the exact sounds he trusted most. Because the most disturbing hunting horror stories are not always about what you see clearly. Sometimes they are about what stays just outside your line of sight. Sometimes they are about how quickly routine can stop protecting you. And sometimes they begin with the simple belief that experience, preparation, and familiarity are enough to keep the woods understandable. We are taught to trust the routine, but routine is not safety. A known spot can still be occupied. A tree can still stop being protection. a voice can still answer from the timber in a way your mind understands too late. And something irreversible can still be waiting in a place you thought you understood. So if you take anything from tonight, let it be this. Do not confuse familiarity with control. Do not confuse elevation with safety. And do not assume the woods are empty just because you cannot see what is moving through them yet. Because sometimes the most dangerous things out there do not crash toward you. Sometimes they stay patient. Sometimes they stay hidden. And sometimes they wait until your morning feels completely normal before they let you know they were there first. A stand site in the Pennsylvania timber. A tree in the Louisiana bottomland. A stretch of dark elk country in the Black Hills where something answered back. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Stories about familiar routines, ordinary environments, and the exact moment a place stops feeling neutral and starts feeling wrong. Let me know in the comments which story stayed with you the longest. Dan Earnhardt in Allegheny National Forest, Corey Embry in the Tensas River Basin, or Declan Wells in the Black Hills. And if you have your own experience, a morning in the woods that turned strange too slowly, a place that felt wrong before you could explain why, or a hunt you still think about long after it should have left you, you can always share it. The business email is in the channel bio. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying with the quiet dread at the edge of the tree line. And until next time, watch the timber, trust what feels wrong, and remember, the woods do not have to show you everything to let you know you should leave. And remember, the dark awaits.